Welcome to Halitics, and excuse the lozenge, but I don't want to start coughing in the middle of this live stream. I'm doing my best to keep, my gosh, how long have I been coughing up? It's been over 2 weeks. This is horrible, this bronchitis that I've got. I'm going to talk more about Dr. King. One program really isn't enough. I mean, 1 year isn't enough. The amount of inspiration, of brilliance, of compassion, of empathy that was this man's life's work, even in just, I believe he died under 40 years old. He was just under 40, is extraordinary. And if I could live most like anybody, it would be Dr. King. Certainly there were, and I've said this, I hate to even mention, there obviously were personal peccadillos. We know about that in part because of what I consider to be illegal wiretapping. Nobody's perfect. This man freed millions. He started us down the road towards a better society in multitude of ways. And that is a gift that we can never, repay. So to me, Dr. King is the greatest of Americans. And, if I can be a shadow of what he was, that would be extraordinary from my perspective. I said something yesterday that I think deserves a little more clarification. I went back and listened to the video I did with Arlen. By the way, it is, I don't know if I said it. I always want to start every one of my live streams. Welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. I'm not sure if I'm doing that every time. It's kind of like, hello, I'm Johnny Cash. Only here it's welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. Please do click like, click subscribe. We need to get those numbers up. I mean, I'm doing my best to try to make things just a little better. We're going to hear from some other folks later in the live stream who are doing what they're doing, and I honor that as well. Nobody did more, of course, than the man who is prominently featured in the image on your screen right now, Dr. King. I said that Dr. King wouldn't use the term white privilege. He did use terms. I think he used the term, I don't know if it was in widespread use, systemic racism. He viewed racism, obviously, as a great evil, perhaps the greatest evil. He had grown up in a profoundly racist society. He saw the extraordinary poverty that beset African Americans, not exclusively, but very disproportionately. He saw the lynching. He grew up in relatively privileged circumstances, certainly for an African American, but even for many Americans, he was solidly middle class. Went to college, Boston University, first at Morehead in Atlanta. Sorry, Morehouse in Atlanta, and then to Boston University, where he got his doctorate. So he lived a relatively privileged life, about as well as one could, being black in a profoundly racist society. And he was determined to fight that racism, even though he personally wasn't as seriously victimized as many. And there's, nothing we can do, I don't believe, to repay him except try to continue the fight. I said that Dr. King wouldn't use the term white privilege because I believe that Dr. King's focus was injustice to all people. He viewed poverty as one of the great injustices, war as one of the great injustices, and his challenge to America, but to the world more greatly, to inequality, to injustice, to racism, didn't go over well. I mean, there's no question about it. As Arlen pointed out, I mean, he was despised, he was challenged, he was killed, he was murdered because he challenged ultimately the status quo. And you see here, this is from the Smithsonian Magazine, 75% of Americans disapproved of Dr. King when he spoke out against the Vietnam War and economic disparity, economic inequality, and poverty. So this is from James Cobb. So where I get the idea that he wouldn't have liked the term white privilege is because he wanted to unify poor whites, working class whites, and struggling whites with African Americans in that struggle against not simply a profoundly racist society, but a profoundly unjust society in terms of economic opportunity and wealth and income distribution. So this is from that article I showed you from Smithsonian Magazine, where many Americans, apparently 75% of white Americans, disapproved of Dr. King while he was alive. And he said to Alex Haley, of course, author later of Roots, that he wanted the federal government to spend $50 billion to help African Americans who were in poverty, who needed jobs. He pointed out that this would, in the end, save us money. Almost certainly he was correct. But he didn't limit in that interview with Haley his prescription for America to addressing the ills that beset African Americans because of, but not only because of racism, but because of just simply economic injustice as part of our capitalist society. He notes that the problems that were so challenging to the African American community, including school dropouts, family breakups, high crime rates, illegitimacy, swollen relief rolls, welfare, rioting, and other social evils, were not limited to black people. Many poor whites were in the very same boat, and he wanted a grand alliance to exert massive pressure on the government to get jobs. And I circled for all because that was, in the end, what Dr. King wanted. He wanted justice for all. When he talked about judging people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, he wasn't referring only to black people, he was referring to all people. The term white privilege, in my view, does divide us by race. It divides poor whites from blacks. And that was the opposite, the clear opposite of what Dr. King wanted. He wanted all Americans, but most particularly Americans who were victims of an unjust society, and a society which, by the way, since he was murdered, has become ever more unjust, at least in terms of the distribution of wealth, and are continuing endless war, just as we had in his final years, his final decade, the Vietnam debacle, the war crimes of Kissinger and Nixon and many others as well. So here's from The Atlantic. This was published about a little less than 6 years ago. King's greatest focus, again, poverty and economic injustice. And from this article, this is, again, my focus. What I'm trying to do here is unite us. When I say us, a multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-class coalition against the rulers, the elites, the 1%, and their, managerial accolades. That's what I'm trying to do here. That is not what MSNBC is trying to do. That is not what CNN is trying. That's not what the New York Times is trying to do. And I don't know what more I can say on this program or in my, social media posts. I used to write a lot at halginsberg.com. I really should get back into it. I don't know what more I can do to persuade you. I feel like I've been my arguments have been about as good as they can be, and yet it seems as though they fall on, to a great degree, sadly, tragically, from where I sit anyway, and maybe from where you sit, deaf ears. Give me a call. What do you think? 240-242-5646. We'll get to the Iowa caucuses and why I'm, again, aghast at MSNBC. And we'll also talk about the climate holocaust. But from the article in Smithsonian that I referred to, where King's focus in his final year was poverty and economic injustice, this is where the Smithsonian comes down on this specific article. He was talking to his ally at that time, Walter Fauntleroy, who later became a politician in Washington, D.C., that he was concerned about the 40 million poor people in this country. Why are there 40 million poor? And he realized when he was talking about that in 1968, the year he was assassinated, he realized when he was discussing this that he was trotting on remarkably dangerous ground for him. That this focus not just on civil rights, but on economic rights, on this is a challenge to the elites, to the incredible amount of wealth and power that was controlled by a small number of Americans. By the way, at that time, the distribution of wealth was far less unjust than it is today. There were no billionaires, as far as I know, in 1968. Maybe J.P. Getty, right? Maybe John Paul Getty, but other than him, and maybe one or two others, the distribution was far fairer. CEOs did not make hundreds of times what their workers made. They made dozens of times what their workers made. So King was facing a terrible problem that has become ever worse in the subsequent 56 years. He said there's something clearly wrong with our economic system. And when he talked about 40 million poor, he wasn't only talking about blacks. He was talking about Americans, black, white, Latino. That's what he recognized. That's who Dr. King recognized were the victims of the capitalist system that the rapacious, which has only grown, I can't keep saying it, rapacious capitalist system in which we live now. And also victims of racism, that racism, a tool to keep blacks and whites apart, also harmed white people because it did just that. It kept poor, struggling, and working people from joining forces against the elites, the aristocrats, whatever term you want to use. So 40 million poor people. There were not 40 million black people in America in 1968. The latest census totals published that year show 21 million. So this is in thousands of people. 21 million black poor, or sorry, 21 million black people, African Americans in the United States in 1967. Not all of them obviously were impoverished. Certainly the numbers would suggest perhaps well under 50%. So if you assume 10 million of the 21 million African Americans were poor, the balance of the 40 million poor, the Poor People's Campaign, the coalition that Dr. King was building when he was murdered, 75% were not black. He was building truly a multiracial, multi-ethnic, colorblind group of I said coalition, a hopefully a majority, a true silent, but no longer not silent majority, like the one Nixon talked about. That's why I say he wouldn't have used the term white privilege. Want to join me? 240-242-5646. That is not to say that Dr. King did not believe racism was a terrible evil. In fact, the greatest evil, he often said in speeches, although he also discussed war. He talked about healthcare inequality. He talked about poverty. He recognized that these were all intersectional, although he wouldn't have used that term either. It wasn't in widespread use. When we focus on Trump, when we talk about Republican voters, when we talk about MAGA voters as though they are the problem, we are perpetuating that problem. Dr. King would have recognized and that the people who vote Republican themselves may often be victims of a truly unjust society. That they too are looking for solutions, and that those answers to the problems that they face are not being supplied, are not being presented by either political party. Iowa yesterday, Trump won pretty big. It's funny because, and we'll play a clip from Maddow. I said Maddow melts down. I got that, I found I've done some of the most popular videos that I've done are ones where I mention sort of lightning rod type media figures. So I think I had one about Cenk. Cenk Ugar's Unhinged, which he kind of was, actually. I can't remember exactly what that was. That got well over 1,000 hits. The one I did on Brianna Joy Gray, BJG Jumps the Shark, also has done very well. So these are kind of lightning rod type hot button media figures who many on the far left, especially when it comes to Cenk, revile. So if you beat up on a Cenk Uygur, there's a certain cohort. It's just, relatively small, but compared, to my normal audience large, that will react to that. And same with Brianna Joy Gray, although she's certainly far more, and rightfully so, far more appreciated. So here I mentioned Maddow meltdown, MSNBC meltdown over these numbers. I'll play the video. I'm not sure she really melted down, but it really does reflect the video. It really shows you why MSNBC is a huge part of the problem. And I hope you won't share their videos as though this is some sort of you're owning, right, the repugs. Because what you're really doing is empowering the billionaire class when you quote, when you cite, when you retweet anything from an MSNBC, CNN, NYT. What you're really doing is you're carrying water for the billionaire class. You're making it harder for poor Australian working people to unite. So I'm going to say to you, don't do that. Now, there are some issues that do divide us intra-class that we have to discuss. And I think the first and foremost of those is clearly the climate holocaust. But, I can't help it. There are a lot of working class voters, maybe a majority, who don't take it nearly as seriously as they should, even though they're often the greater victims. But it is what it is. This is a terrible existential threat that we have to discuss. My solution, again, is to pit the elites against everybody else. Elites consume far more fossil fuels. Let's tax fossil fuels, reduce, and then redistribute the wealth down. The rich buy more fossil fuels. They'll pay higher taxes. This will be a progressive tax. Unfortunately for me, again, and maybe for you, I haven't done a great job explaining it because I think most people still don't really understand why doing this would actually lead to greater wealth and income equality, would lead to a better society. So Trump didn't really have a blowout, I don't believe, 51%. This was, I think, what was expected for him to get. What stood out for me from these numbers, and I'm not really fond, so I really don't care, honestly. They're all awful. None of them are, probably DeSantis is the worst, but maybe Haley is, and maybe Trump is. I don't know. Trump is the one who's the most likely, I guess, to, turn us into some sort of dictatorship or tyranny. I don't know that DeSantis or Haley have that in them or have that desire. I don't know. I think Richard Nixon people thought might do that. I don't know. They're all awful. I think what strikes me, though, is Haley did not even get second place. She got third. And remember, the discussion we've been hearing is, Nikki Haley, she can win this. We've got to push her. We've got to promote her campaign. the billionaire class, represented by Jamie Dimon, saying you got to vote for Nikki Haley. Let's go to New Hampshire. If you live in New Hampshire, even if you hate Trump, you got to vote for Haley. That's what I want you to do, especially if you're a Republican. If you're a Democrat, cross over, because whatever happens, it's going to be Biden in the general. So let's support Haley. That's the Jamie Dimon argument. And of course, that fell on completely deaf ears. Nobody bought it. Or few people bought it. But I think it's interesting, because what that tells me is that what Haley did was really go all in for the 1%. I mean, she pretty much avoided the populism. She talked over and over, about economic issues that would benefit the billionaire class. And this just didn't fly. DeSantis gets second, mainly because he did, the immigrant baiting, the way Trump has been an immigrant baiter, right? And so DeSantis kind of was number two in terms of the number, who can be more aggressively anti-immigrant. Haley tied her trough to a great degree to Israel, as I think did DeSantis. And, that's not a popular issue. Americans don't want us in endless war. They don't want us supporting a state, and I will say, arguably a genocidal state in Israel. They don't want that. I was going to talk about genocide in Israel. Is Israel a genocidal state? What are the arguments today? That'll be tomorrow. Just isn't time. Because I want to get to, again, we talked about King. We'll talk about the caucuses a little more, and then we'll get to the climate catastrophe, the climate holocaust. So this is the lesson that the corporate media never, ever wants you to hear, that Trump is popular because he presents himself with a little tiny degree of credibility as a champion of everyday Americans, of working class Americans. The tariffs, the criticism of the Bush family for being losers, calling Hillary crooked Hillary. These people, the Clintons, the Bushes, they're elites. They represent the corporate class. They are the corporate class. Of course, so is Trump. But by going after them, Trump is giving working class and middle class Americans somebody to hate. Somebody who actually is, to a significant degree, the cause of their problems. And then he does the immigrant bashing. Well, when labor supply goes up, the price of labor goes down. This is the ironclad law of supply and demand, Econ 101. The supply of anything goes up, demand for it will, when the supply of anything goes up, the price of that thing, person, whatever it is, goes down. So when labor supply goes up, employers can pit workers against each other. That's the reason they were so desperate to persuade Bill Clinton and poured so much money into the Clinton campaign to pass NAFTA, and why they co-opted Barack Obama to support the TPP. Because when there's, quote, free, unquote, trade, workers across borders, across frontiers, across oceans are pitted against each other. The supply of labor available to employers goes up. And when supply goes up, price of labor, obviously the wages paid to workers, goes down. Workers get that. That's why Trump and his tariffs are popular. among so many working people. Now, did he enact enough tariffs? No. Did he push harder for more tariffs? No. But he did something. He countered the prevailing free trade paradigm that we've had since at least Reagan was president. And that's why Trump is popular. Trump is popular because he has said we've got to stop these endless wars. We shouldn't be spending billions and billions of dollars killing people. We don't want to be in Ukraine, and neither does he, or at least he says he doesn't. We don't want to be in Israel either, and of course he, insists we have to support Israel. He gets it. There's lots of billionaire donors who he would lose if he came out against the war in Israel, and he may himself believe it, I don't really know. But these are the reasons Trump is popular. It's not because he's some sort of hateful person that appeals to other haters. DeSantis and Haley are just as hateable and just as much haters. It's that Trump has presented himself to a degree as a populist and presents some members of the ruling elites as the enemy. And that is why he's popular. Now, you will never, ever, ever hear that on MSNBC, because MSNBC wants to divide us. They don't want to acknowledge any faults among the Democratic ruling elites because they're doing great. They're making tons of money, fist over hand. And in fact, they are the Democratic elites. Did Rachel really have a meltdown? Did MSNBC really have a meltdown when they reported on Trump's win? Which, again, it wasn't anything unexpected. I mean, it's kind of absurd. Oh, we can't believe this. How did this happen? I mean, everyone knew it was going to happen. There's no surprises. I'll play you the clip in just a sec. But, I mean, I guess what I, again, find so sort of dispiriting is that there's so many people who watch this crap. I mean, I don't get it. Their audience is very, very large. Maddow's audience is very large. If you want to join me, I'd like to hear why do you like Rachel Maddow? If you like Rachel Maddow, what is it about her program that you find interesting, appealing? Do you find her to be some sort of a voice of truth? Does she speak truth to power? Is that why? I mean, I'm curious. Let's go to the video. What was his name? Did O'Reilly really? And I know Scott Dick from Monterey used to call him O'Reilly, which I liked. That was good. He was a heck of a liar. Sean hasn't any. Some of Scott's. I remember those little, word games he would play. All right, here we go. There's of course Jen Psaki. So this is your Democratic Party organ. Jen Psaki, former spokesperson for Joe Biden, now going right over to MSNBC. And doesn't that cause you to say, well, why would I even watch this stuff? I mean, if I'm just hearing straight out, she was paid to lie. She's a paid liar. And she continues that. So why would I want to watch this? I mean, I'm just curious. If you want to tell me, please call in 240-242-5646. And if you are watching this and you can't call in or I'm not live, put it in the chat or put it in the comments. Please, what is it you find compelling enough about this to watch it?
So I think the big picture takeaway from that, and I don't mean to be, again, too dark, as you said, on this, but it is not, if we are worried about the rise of authoritarianism in this country, we are worried about potential rise of fascism in this country. If we're worried about our democracy falling to an authoritarian and potentially fascist form of government.
Look at all these yahoos just smirking and smiling at her as she's saying this, rank partisan crap, right? I mean, that's what this is. Yes, Trump's an authoritarian. Why? Why is he appealing to people? And what about Biden? What about endless war? Isn't that fascistic to have endless war? Wars that American people are totally against. We're against continuing to fund Ukraine, which, by the way, the Ukrainian government just killed an American journalist, Gonzalo Lira, who had been reporting on the war, critically reporting on Russia-Ukraine war. He was just killed. America has nothing to say about that. The continuing persecution of Julian Assange, that isn't fascist. That isn't tyrannical. The control that the oil and gas industry has over our government, regardless of whether the Democrats or Republicans are in power, that isn't fascistic. Endless war, right? All of it. But all Rachel Maddow, Trump. And the worst thing is that he has people who vote for him.
The leader who is trying to do that is part of that equation. But people wanting that is a much bigger part of that.
Okay, so why? Why? You'll never hear any kind of analysis that provides any real understanding, empathy, sympathy, understanding of why so many Americans, so many who struggle, many who voted for, by the way, Barack Obama, have just said, you know what? I can't vote for the Democrats. Trump says a few things I like. And you'll hear a lot of Trump voters say, you know, I didn't like the January 6th. But the thing is, it's been overplayed by the media. It's been overblown by the Democrats. I don't think that's completely fair. I mean, it was really bad, January 6th. Let's not minimize it. On the other hand, how come the Democrats didn't use January 6th as an opportunity? The progressive Democrats, the AOCs, the Squad, they could have used this as an opportunity to say to Democratic leadership, there's so much unrest. There's so much anger out there. We need to do something. We need to harness that in support of real change. Nothing. Just let's demonize them. They're deplorables.
Right. And the American electorate is made up of two major parties. One of those parties has been flirting with extremism on the ultra-right for a very long time. They've brought them in. I
just love of course, Jen's, this is a former spokesperson for the president, current president. Of course he's going to be nodding.
In a way that they haven't been central to Republican electoral politics ever before, and I know.
Right, and she says, haven't been central to right, and I know because in the past, people like, the Bushes and stuff, they pretty much appealed to elites. They weren't looking at working class voters. They didn't try to get the Bubba vote the way Bill Clinton did. And what a terrible thing now. Republicans are actually trying to get working class voters. This means we should do what? It sure doesn't mean we should talk about wealth redistribution or income redistribution, does it, Ms. $10 million a year, Rachel Maddow?
Because I've been studying this. But once you have radicalized one major party so that those are the preferences of the people who adhere to your party, the leader's interchangeable. And yes, Trumpism is sometimes what we call it. MAGA movement is probably a better way to do it. But there is an authoritarian movement inside Republican politics that isn't being bamboozled by Trump. They are pushing Trump to get more and more extreme, because the more extreme things he says, the more they adhere to him. And that is coming from a very large proportion of the American right that adheres to the Republican Party. And that's why this is a Republican Party problem more than it is the problem of one man and his leadership.
All right, there's so much wrong with what she just said, but I want to just focus, I guess, on the last thing for just a moment, that this is a Republican Party thing. No, it's not. And you hear that all the time. Oh, it's a Republican problem. It's an American problem, because we have two really, really awful parties that do not in any way represent the American public writ large. And for that reason, many Americans are finding themselves appealed to and attracted by, including many Americans of color, by Donald Trump. For the reasons I stated, some okay, some understandable, some bad. That's an American problem. If you feel, Rachel Maddow, that Donald Trump is such a threat to you, then that's a problem for you. Now, is she melting down? I don't think so. What does she care? This is good for her ratings. Give a rat's ass. Whatever happens to her taxes aren't going up very much. Whatever happens to her, there's going to be no real, there's going to be no hunger in the Maddow family. She's doing just fine. These people, they're not your allies. They're not your friends. They don't care about you. In fact, they're your economic enemy. No more nor less than Trump. So this idea that somehow it's the Republicans' problem, no. It's an American problem. It's not a problem for Rachel Maddow because she doesn't care. It doesn't affect her. It's actually good for her because it improves her ratings. But to the extent that Donald Trump has popularity, that is a direct reflection of the moral and intellectual bankruptcy of that is in the Democratic Party just as much as the Republican. Yeah, I mean, so unless we get that, we will just get more Trumps. And I would note one other thing. It's really important. It's instructive the way Maddow says, hey, it's not just Trump. It's the whole party. So why does she do that? Why is that important? I mean, it's true. I think it's fair to say probably Trump is less bad than other people in the party. Why does she say that? In some ways. Again, he's probably the more authoritarian and dictatorial, so in that way he's worse. But why just blame everyone? Because a lot of the policy, people like Chris Christie, for example, and frankly, Nikki Haley, I'm sure Rachel agrees with them, right? I mean, there's nothing I would say in Nikki Haley's policy platform that Maddow has a problem with. So what is it about? She used to be a Republican, Maddow, by the way. Her comes from a Republican family. So why does she then say it's all Republicans? Because she wants that seed planted in all of you that you just have to vote blue no matter who. It doesn't matter how badly you're betrayed by Democrats. It doesn't matter what policies Democrats pursue, no matter what they do, no matter how bad it is. It doesn't matter. You still have to vote for them. That's her role. That's the function that she serves in our society. A complete backstop for Democratic elites. And really, in the end, Republican elites too. Because if you accept that there's only 0 and 1, there's only Democrats and Republicans, you have to vote for one or the other no matter what, then neither party has any real incentive to change. It's only if the parties are threatened, because they have no incentive to change, because the policies that they pursue benefit the ones who make the decisions. The Koch brothers are richer than ever. They may be Republicans, but Democratic policies have made them richer than ever. Elon Musk is extraordinarily wealthy. Democratic policies have made him the richest man in the world. It doesn't matter. There's going to be no change in the status quo, any meaningful change in the status quo, unless we break free of the two-party paradigm. And Rachel Maddow is there, just as Sean Hannity is there, to make sure that you don't get some crazy fakaked ideas that just maybe we should vote for somebody other than Joe Biden or Donald Trump or whoever the Republicans nominate. Is this the answer? So let me move on. People that I really and truly honor, who are doing what we absolutely need to, so the climate catastrophe, the climate holocaust is the existential threat. Well, endless war on a daily basis is killing more people, right? It's doing more direct harm. But war has never been that efficient a killer. Actually, hunger is a more efficient killer. Disease is a more efficient killer. In the end, the climate holocaust may lead to more deaths. I mean, I think we're losing I don't know what the people estimate different numbers, hundreds of thousands a year. Not as many as are killed in war, but it's up there. So are the people who are fighting against that, who are doing everything they can, who are taking on the elites in both parties, are they the real heroes of our time? I say they are among them. They are as deserving of honor as anyone, as any protesters or civil disobedience of our time. Here you see my good friends in Climate Defiance, some folks I actually recognize that I protested with. I was not aware of this. They're confronting Joe Manchin. What I find really, among many things I find really, really interesting, this is earlier today. This was this morning. I don't know where it was. I was trying to figure out from that video whether they drove over to West Virginia. Probably it's in the D.C. area somewhere. I'm going to speculate, but I don't know. This was in a diner. And I was thinking, remember the sit-ins in the 50s? Those were at diners. Those were at counters at Woolworths and, five and dime stores in the South. So you're seeing the civil rights movement, the part 2, part 3, whatever you want to call it, now. And the protesters today are doing it in diners, just as they did in the 1950s.
Off fossil fuels! Off fossil fuels! Mention off fossil fuels! Off fossil fuels! Mention off fossil fuels! Off fossil fuels! Mention off fossil fuels!
As far as the greatest concern I have right now, if you ask what's the greatest threat I think we face, it's the border crisis.
All right, so this is kind of the new thing, right? It's the border crisis. This is the greatest threat we face. And it is I can understand why people are upset. I talked about this before, that, increases in the supply of labor mean decreases in the price of labor. The border crisis, the border situation is a problem. I mean, I'm not down in Texas. I'm not seeing it. I don't know, but I'm going to assume it's true. I know that our public schools here in Maryland are definitely facing a bit of a crisis from all the immigrant kids coming in who are very poor, and they're not able to, their families can't contribute as much in taxes as the cost. So it is an issue. It's an issue in New York State, no question about it. But when you say the biggest threat we face is the border crisis, you better talk about what U.S. policy is that is causing people to flee in droves from Latin America, from South America, and from Asia. And that includes the climate holocaust. That includes climate refugees. So I honor, and the other problem I have with calling it the border crisis is these are human beings. These are human beings, again, who are suffering because of American policy, because of U.S. policy. We have a duty to make life a little better for them, to make things okay for them. They're human beings. That's not where Joe Manchin is going with that. Joe Manchin just doesn't want to talk about the millions and millions and millions he's pocketed by doing the bidding of the oil, gas, and coal industry.
Off fossil fuels, mention off fossil fuels! Off fossil fuels, mention off fossil fuels! Off fossil fuels, mention off fossil fuels! Off fossil fuels, mention off fossil fuels!
Let's go ahead and
off fossil fuels, mention off fossil fuels! 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 Off fossil fuels! Go now! It's genocide! You are destroying scientific reports say that what you are doing.
All right, so is that enough? I mean, here's the thing. When there were sit-ins in the South, the civil disobedience cost money to relatively small business owners. Those five and dimes, they were not necessarily chained. They weren't owned by, Woolworth Company. They were owned by local business people. there were relatively small bus companies in the South when there was boycotts. Those cost those companies money. Individuals who had real influence in communities were suffered somewhat by the boycotts, by the sit-ins that were organized by civil rights leaders in the South in the 50s and 60s. But who's hurt by what these protesters are doing? What they're trying to do is not hurting. What they're doing isn't hurting the people that they want to stop. They're not hurting Massey Coal. They're not hurting Exxon. They're not hurting pipeline companies. And that's why I'm concerned that it's not going to make a difference. The billions of dollars at stake are, held by a few people. And those people don't give a crap if Joe Manchin, who's paid incredibly well, has to be made uncomfortable. So I love how Climate Defiance says we will not walk like sheep to slaughter. But is this going to stop it? Is this going to end the slaughter? I don't know that it will. I'd like to know what will. When Americans saw Bull Connor with his German shepherds and, fire hydrants and, sicking on kids, beating up kids in the streets of Birmingham, people were disgusted and they said, no, this is wrong. And that's why there was a political will strong enough to pass civil rights legislation. A big reason for it, of course, also because, and we've talked about this, there was less economic injustice back then. Wealth and income inequality weren't the same. People felt a certain degree of economic security, so they were able to have empathy for others besides themselves and support civil rights. I don't know that people seeing this kind of video are going to have sympathy for the ralliers, for the protesters. They're not going to say, well, this is just wrong. So I love that there's direct action. And I participated in these direct actions. But I'm not convinced they're going to make the difference. I hope they do. What do you think? 240-242-5646. It is Halitics. Click like, click subscribe. Tomorrow we'll talk about Israel and Palestine genocide. There's a lot of pushback. I mean, a lot of people don't. It's, you can be a racist, but if you see children having dogs sicked on them by this big, beefy Sheriff Bull Connor, it's kind of hard. I'm not saying you can't defend it. I'm sure, and lots of racists did and blamed outside agitators and all that. But, it's not a great look. But we have a lot of people today who are just saying, oh, the climate Holocaust is a hoax. And when they do that, it's not quite the same. It's not like they're taking the side of bullies. It doesn't look like they're taking the side of bullies. So I think that makes it a little more difficult for those of us who are trying to stop the climate Holocaust to use emotion to sway people, to persuade people. Maybe we can. I'm not saying we can't. I think this particular, it's interesting to me because I would not think this particular image, which is making the rounds on Facebook, and I saw one of my Facebook friends posted, one of my Facebook friends who does not acknowledge, who is in denial about the science. In fact, mocks the science. And again, you'll have to, well, I don't know how I'm not going to, I don't out people for their social media unless they're on my program. And even then I don't always do it. I haven't always, but sometimes I do. Anyway, this is making the rounds. There's Greta. And, I'll never forgive, honestly. I mean, I still watch Jimmy sometimes, Jimmy Dore, and I think he's interesting. But for him to go after her is just, it's beyond the pale. I mean, this is a Still a girl, 19, 20. I mean, she's a young woman, but she's, a girl too. For him to go after her for really penny ante crap is ridiculous, and I have a huge problem with him. She's a hero too. She's fighting desperately to save the planet. She's spot on. So here, this tries to mock her. Oh yeah, it's really cold. And yeah, it is cold right now where I am too. It's been colder. It's not like it's unique, but yeah, it's cold. So you can just see, I'll even show you a picture of where I live. It's very nice. The snow was so pretty. I wish we had more of it. I wish we had more and more often like in the past. But yeah, it's not 60 degrees. It's 31, 32 degrees right now outside my house in suburban Maryland. So, yeah, it's cold, relatively cold. That doesn't mean that there isn't a climate holocaust going on. It means right now there isn't a climate holocaust in this moment in suburban Maryland. And I don't know why this is even a little bit hard for people to understand who are the deniers. And I think for some of them it is. I really do. Look, when Joe Manchin denies the climate holocaust, he does it for money. When Rachel Maddow calls the Trump supporters, anti-democratic and pro-tyranny, she's doing it for money. She may or may not believe anything she says. She's just a paid propagandist. That's who Jen Psaki is. But I think the people who post these memes on Facebook, like, sorry for all, I think they really believe it. I think they don't want to acknowledge just how awful what we're doing to the planet is, just the extraordinary costs. I don't think they want to admit it. They have they're in psychological denial. So I think that's part of it. But they're not corrupt. They're not doing it because they're getting paid to lie to you. They're just wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong. I think the other factor that you often see is, there's, the anti-government streak, the belief that elites are against me, which isn't wholly wrong, right? It's the same basis for those who are anti-vax, right? The big pharma is against me, which it is, right? I mean, that's not untrue. But then they take it too far. So the idea, well, it's the government, it's NASA, it's NOAA, it's these big university professors, and I don't trust them. I don't believe them. They're lying to me. They're trying to make it harder for me to drive my car, which is one of the only things I take any joy in. So, I understand it, but sorry, you're wrong. The climate holocaust is alive and well and destroying our planet. If you really have trouble accepting that or understanding that, there's not a lot I can do. The evidence is overwhelming. But I think this is a good post. I thought this was very apropos from Dr. Stephen Campbell. He calls himself Historian Steve. And just showing how when we get these periodic polar blasts that make things colder in the states, in the continental states, a significant reason for that is indeed often the climate holocaust, because it's much warmer at the top of the world. The jet stream is weaker, which keeps the cold air from being pushed by that jet stream towards the pole. And also because there's less ice, there's less Arctic sea ice. So for these reasons, it's less cold there. And that means warmer, the cold air that normally would be there is still cold. It's cold for us, may not be cold for the Arctic, is coming south. So don't start posting about how much colder it is, so therefore it's cold, so therefore there's no climate holocaust. You want to post it? Fine. Let's wait to see the numbers. Let's wait to see the data. If 2024 is significantly colder, perhaps, than we've seen in 10, 15, 20 years, not just in 2023. 2023 was the highest year on record for because of the trend, the ever increasing amounts of fossil fuel, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and also because of, was it El Nino? That trend is weaker. The El Nino trend is weaker. So 2023, 2024 may not be quite as hot. If we see temperatures going, 1998 was the hottest year on record back in 1998. And it was so hot that it wasn't for another 12 years or so that temperatures began to get significantly hotter than in 98. So that may happen again. 2024 so hot, it may be a while before temperatures again start rising significantly. That doesn't mean we're not in a long-term burning trend as a direct result of human activity. We are. And again, I think this thread was really good. If you want to see it, if you want to link to it, go to Halitics, join Halitics on Facebook, where we post everything. Would love to have you part of Halitics. All right, we're coming up on the end of today's program. I appreciate very much your joining me, for you making Halitics part of your day, part of your media landscape. I hope you'll continue to do that. I hope you'll tell others, because that way we can grow and we can continue to present a viewpoint that is not congenial to those who have basically taken complete control of our world and are doing terrible, terrible things as a direct result. I'll be back tomorrow. We will talk Israel, Palestine. Is what Israel is doing in Gaza genocide? I'll try to be as fair about this as possible. I see both sides. I'm not sure the answer is clear-cut, even though I have presented on this program the position that it's genocide. I want to be, I will revisit that as fairly as I can tomorrow.